There is so much true crime on the internet right now. Podcasts, YouTube videos, Netflix documentaries. It's kind of getting to be a lot. So today I wanted to go over some, from what I could tell, pretty unknown, under the radar, at least not talked about as much, true crime cases. So hopefully you won't have heard any of these before. But let's go ahead and get into these cases. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you want more videos like this. Instagram, Discord in the description. Let's get into this. In July 2015, a 2-year-old boy named Dior Littleman Coons Jr. went on a camping trip with his family into the mountains of eastern Idaho and then just dropped out of the world. No body, no clothing found in the woods, no confirmed sightings, no charges. Years later, the official answer to what happened to him is still, we don't know. But the people closest to the case are very far from agreeing on why that is. So let's back up. Dior is about 2.5 years old. He lives in Idaho Falls with his parents, Jessica Mitchell and Vernal Dior Coons Sr. His family calls him Little Man. According to them, he's very attached to a few comfort items: a blanket, a sippy cup, and a stuffed monkey he drags around with him. On July 9th, 2015, Jessica and Vernal decide to go on a last-minute camping trip to Timber Creek Campground, about 10 miles west of the tiny town of Leodore, up in the Salmon Chalice National Forest. The site itself is simple: a rough road inn, a creek running by the campground, heavy trees and brush, and steep terrain rising on both sides. It's remote, but it's not endless wilderness. Later, searchers will describe it as a relatively small, boxed-in area. There are 4 adults on the trip: Dior's parents, Jessica's grandfather, Robert Bob Walton, and Bob's friend, Isaac Reinwand. 2 vehicles drive up in convoy. They arrive near dark. Reinwand sleeps in a tent. Bob sleeps in his camper. Jessica and Vernal say they sleep with Dior in the back of Bob's Chevy Blazer. The next morning, Friday, July 10th, everyone wakes up at Timber Creek. Reinwand later recalls seeing Dior that morning, quote, clomping around the campsite in cowboy boots that were too big for him, and keep that detail in mind. Later that morning, or around midday, the parents say they put Dior in the truck and drive down into Leodore to the Stage Stop Junction store, about a 30-minute trip each way on rough mountain roads. They say they go for snacks and supplies and then head back up to camp. That stop in town becomes one of the first sore spots in the timeline. Some reporting claims store witnesses remember seeing an empty child seat instead of a child. Other reporting is more cautious and just says the witness accounts aren't clear enough to treat as solid proof either way. But either way, one of the only chances for neutral witnesses to confirm seeing Dior that day ends up murky, and that's where the timeline starts to wobble. Back at Timber Creek in the early afternoon, the group settles around camp. At some point, Jessica and Vernal say they decide to walk a short distance away from the campsite to check out a nearby fishing spot. They say they leave Dior behind with his great-grandfather, Bob. In early interviews, they describe this as a quick walk, maybe 10 to 20 minutes. Far enough that they're not in the direct sight of camp, but close enough that they feel comfortable letting their son hang out with Grandpa. This is where one of the biggest contradictions in the whole case sits. The parents' version is this: they left their son with Grandpa, walked off for a bit, and when they came back, he was gone. But later, in conversations with investigators, Grandpa Bob reportedly says he never clearly heard Jessica ask him to watch the boy, and thought the parents had taken Dior with them when they walked away. So, in the exact window where everyone thinks someone else is watching the toddler, there's a gap. The adult stories don't line up about who was actually responsible for him. Meanwhile, the 4th adult, Isaac, says he was down at the creek fishing and didn't know anything was wrong until he saw the others searching. But what everyone agrees on is this: sometime in that early afternoon window, the parents return to the campsite and say their son is no longer there. When they can't find them, the 4 adults start calling for Dior and looking around camp. After a short period, the exact timing depends on whose account you're looking at, Jessica calls 911 from the campground at 2:28 p.m. On that call, she tells the dispatcher, "My 2-year-old son, we can't find him." She describes him as wearing cowboy boots, pajama pants, and a camouflage jacket with shaggy blonde hair. And that outfit becomes the image on flyers and billboards across Idaho. Lemhi County deputies and search and rescue teams head toward Timber Creek, but the campground is remote and it takes time to get people in. And here I'm gonna play a little bit of that 911 call. Not the whole thing, because it's pretty long, but just the most important, disturbing, and sad parts. Once the search truly gets underway, they push hard. Volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder grid lines through the trees and brush, ATVs and horses covering the terrain, K9 teams, divers in the creek and reservoir working through log jams and undercut banks. Over the first days, more than 200 people show up to look for a 2-year-old in an area that, on paper, is not very big. They don't find anything. No clothes, no boots, no diaper, no blood, no confirmed tracks, no remains. Even his blanket and stuffed monkey are reportedly still at the campsite, which stands out if he had simply wandered off, because his parents say he rarely liked to leave those behind. At first, law enforcement doesn't go public accusing anyone of foul play. The sheriff at the time, Lynn Bowerman, tells the media that they haven't ruled anything out, but that in those early days, they don't specifically suspect the family of hurting their child. The main possibilities being floated are that he wandered off and succumbed to the terrain or the creek, that he was taken by a wild animal, or that he was abducted by a stranger, which is truly sad. The parents lean hard into the abduction idea in interviews, making emotional appeals to whoever has their son to bring him home. As days turn into months and nothing shows up on the mountain, the tone changes. The search area has been worked over repeatedly. If a toddler had drowned or been dragged off by an animal that close to camp, investigators say they would normally expect some physical sign. Clothing, bones, disturbed ground. They have none of that. At the same time, detectives are re-interviewing the 4 adults. According to Bowerman and later summaries, the stories they hear shift over time. The length of the walk, the distances, who was there. Jessica and Vernal also take polygraphs and, according to the sheriff, do less than truthful on key questions. In January 2016, about 6 months after the disappearance, Bowerman publicly names the parents as suspects in their son's case. He says investigators believe Dior was either accidentally or intentionally killed, and that the parents know more than they're saying. In one TV interview, he goes even further and says that after all the searching and all the interviews, there's really only one possibility left, that it has to be a homicide. In his mind, they've given the parents too many chances to explain an accident, and the absence of that explanation points in one direction. Jessica and Vernal deny any involvement and insist their son was abducted. They haven't been arrested or charged with anything connected to the disappearance. On paper, it remains an open missing child case, but from that point forward, the separation and the difference between how the sheriff's office talks about it and how the parents talk about it is obvious. With the official investigation stalled, private investigators come into the story. The first is former US Marshal Frank Vilt. At the start, he leans toward the abduction theory. Over time, he says he loses confidence in the parent story and eventually withdraws from the case, writing a letter saying he believes they've lied to him about what happened. Then the family hires Texas PI Philip Klein. Klein interviews the parents, Grandpa Bob and Isaac, and spends time reconstructing the timeline on the ground. After months on the case, he releases a detailed report and publicly concludes that there is no credible evidence of a wild animal attack, no credible evidence of a stranger abduction from that remote site, and that the parents' stories change in documented ways. He ultimately says he doesn't believe Dior ever even actually made it to the mountain. Klein's team then searches Jessica and Vernal's old apartment in Idaho Falls after the couple is evicted, and the landlord gives permission to go through what's left behind. In that abandoned unit, they report finding a toddler-sized camouflage jacket, a small pair of boots, and 4 matchbox cars that match items the parents had described as missing with the child. All of it is turned over to Lemhi County authorities. This becomes one of the most controversial pieces of the whole puzzle. If those are the clothes Dior was supposedly wearing at the time of the 911 call, that undercuts the description of him as a little boy in boots, pajama pants, and a camo jacket up on the mountain. People close to the family counter that he had more than one camouflage jacket, more than one pair of boots, and that Klein is just overstating the match. Around the same period, a search with cadaver dogs reportedly hits on several areas near the campground, including one site about 3/4 of a mile away that Klein's report calls a possible holding site for a body. Again, nothing conclusive is recovered. No remains, no hard physical evidence that can go to a jury. The relationship between Klein and the family falls apart. He accuses them publicly. They fire him and later sue him for defamation. A judge throws out the lawsuit finding that he didn't lie, and Klein continues to repeat his theory that the parents know what happened. After Klein, the family brings in another private investigator, David Marshburn. Marshburn had worked other high-profile missing persons cases and says he comes to a very different conclusion. He says he believes the parents are innocent and instead focuses on Isaac, the 4th adult on the trip. And if you remember, Isaac is Isaac Reinwand, who is a friend of Grandpa Bob. Marshburn has claimed in interviews that he obtained a recording in which Isaac confessed in some way to knowing more about the case. Isaac maintains he had nothing to do with Dior's disappearance and was just there to fish. Law enforcement doesn't publicly endorse Marshburn's theory, and no charges follow from it. By this point, you have a sheriff saying the case has to be a homicide and naming the parents as suspects, one PI saying it was an accidental homicide covered up by the parents and that the child may never have reached the campsite. Another PI saying the parents are innocent and pointing at Isaac, and the parents themselves insisting their son was abducted and suing people who accuse them. And through all of that, there is still no body. In more recent coverage, investigators talk about 3 broad theories they still look at. One is an animal attack. In that version, Dior wanders off and is killed and scavenged by wildlife in the mountains. The problem, as people who search point out, is the lack of physical evidence after such a massive effort. For a lot of them, it's hard to reconcile a fatal animal attack that close to camp with 0 trace left behind. Another is a stranger abduction. This is the scenario the parents have always leaned toward. But Timber Creek is a small, somewhat contained campground. Investigators say there was no one else known to be camping there that day, no other vehicles regularly coming and going, and no witnesses who saw a stranger near the boy. The idea that someone quietly approached, grabbed a toddler in cowboy boots, and disappeared down a rough mountain road without anyone hearing or seeing anything is a stretch for many people who have stood on that ground. The third theory is foul play by someone in the group. That sits behind Bowerman's homicide comments, Klein's accidental homicide conclusion, and a lot of online speculation. The idea is that something happened either on the way up, at the campground, or earlier, and that parts of the camping trip narrative were constructed afterward to cover it. The main support for that theory is circumstantial, such as inconsistent stories, failed or inconclusive polygraphs, the clothing and toys Klein's team says they found in the apartment, and the sheer thoroughness of the searches compared to the total lack of physical trace on the mountain. None of these 3 theories has ever led to an arrest. Officially, it remains an unsolved missing child case. The fallout has been heavy. The parents have lived under a cloud of suspicion for almost a decade. They've been the target of harassment and constant accusations online. In 2024, their attorney filed files a new defamation lawsuit against a woman running a Justice for Baby Dior volunteer page, arguing that years of public attacks pushed Vernal into suicidal thoughts. Private citizens have dissected the case in Facebook groups, Reddit threads, and some YouTube videos, going over so many details, like the store shop, the boots, the jacket in the apartment, the cadaver dog hits, and the feud between investigators. But on the official side, the basics haven't changed. Age-progressed images show what Dior might have looked like as a preschooler. If he somehow survived, he'd be in middle school now. Investigators say they still follow up on tips and remain open to new information. But after all this time, there's still no confirmed trace of Dior Coons Jr. on that mountain or anywhere else. When I first went looking into the name Adil Eston Patton, I honestly expected to find a full article or two, maybe an old TV segment, something. Instead, I found almost nothing, just a handful of references, mostly the same paragraph copied around, and a man's entire murder basically reduced to a line on a cold case page. What we do know is very simple, and that's part of what makes it so unsettling. Adil Patton was 81 years old. He lived at 24376 Corinth Road, a rural address near Thompsonville in Williamson County, Illinois. On Tuesday, December 27th, 2005, at about 10:15 in the morning, he was found dead inside that home. The autopsy later confirmed he died from a stab wound, not a fall and not natural causes. He was murdered. According to the one contemporaneous article that's been preserved and reposted, also I hope I pronounced that word right, the Williamson County Sheriff's Department quickly went public asking for help. Then Sheriff Tom Cundiff released a photo of Patton and asked anyone who had seen him or his vehicle, a 1991 white Chevrolet Geo, in Saline, Williamson, or Franklin counties on December 26th, the day before he was found, to contact investigators. The way Cundiff phrased it is very old school detective. He talks about how people often think what they saw didn't matter, but that one casual, "I saw him at such and such place" detail could be the missing piece in a homicide investigation. From there, almost everything else we have comes from a single Web Sleuths post by someone local who clearly cared about him. They say Patton was tortured and murdered in his home, and that the house had been ransacked, as if whoever was there was searching for something specific. That description, torture, ransacked home, is not spelled out in the brief newspaper summary, but it is consistent with how people in the area remembered the crime. The same poster mentions a word-of-mouth story that a local man used Patton's credit card after the murder, but even they flag that as rumor, not something confirmed in print. What struck me is how quiet everything goes after that. There's no follow-up coverage you'd expect for an elderly man stabbed to death in his own home. No person of interest questioned, no family begs for answers piece a year later, just silence. The cold case pages and Facebook posts years down the line repeat the same core facts. He was discovered in his home on Corinth Road. He died from a stab wound. The sheriff's office is still looking for information about his movements and his car on December 26th, and the case remains unsolved. So when I say that I researched the murder of Adil Eston Patton, what I really mean is that I kept running into the limits of what the public is allowed to see. On paper, it's an 81-year-old widower in a tiny rural community stabbed to death in what looks like a targeted attack, possibly with his house torn apart by someone looking for something, and then nearly 2 decades of official silence. No arrests, no public suspect, just an open invitation from the sheriff's department hanging in the air. If you saw him or that white Geo on December 26, 2005, they still want to hear from you. When I started digging into the Caitlin Akins case, what jumped out at me was how sadly ordinary the whole thing is and the setup is. This is a 19-year-old, which by the way is my age, who has her life mapped out. She's living in Lake Havasu City, Arizona with her fiance Amber, getting ready to start cosmetology school, and she flies back to Virginia for a quick family visit and to meet her brand new nephew. It's a trip that was supposed to be very normal and routine. A few days with family, pick up her high school diploma from her mom's house because the school in Arizona needs it, and then back to her normal life on December 5th in time for classes to start on the 7th. Caitlin spends that visit in Spotsylvania County with her mom, Lisa Sullivan, and her little sister. She's excited, she's talking about school, and by all accounts, she's not acting like someone who is about to run away or disappear. She doesn't have a history of vanishing on people. She's close with her family, she texts them constantly, and she's got real plans in Arizona. The only logistical wrinkle is that Lisa has to work on the morning of Caitlin's flight and can't drive her to the airport herself. So she asks her ex-husband, Caitlin's former stepfather, James Branton, to take her instead. He lives in Partlow in rural Spotsylvania County, and everyone's on decent enough terms that this doesn't set off any alarm bells at the time. On the morning of December 5th, 2015, Lisa drops Caitlin off at James's house around 8:30 a.m. From there, he's supposed to get her to Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport for a late afternoon flight back to Arizona. A few hours later, at 1:52 p.m., Lisa gets a text from James saying he's dropped Caitlin off. At that point, his story is that he took her straight to the airport. Not long after, that story shifts. He tells investigators he actually dropped her at Springfield Town Center, a big mall in Springfield, Virginia, so she could walk over to the metro station and take the train to the airport herself. 8 minutes after James texts Lisa, a message comes in from Caitlin's phone. It says, "I'm at the airport. Battery dying, so won't be able to text for a bit." Lisa takes that at face value in the moment. It sounds exactly like the kind of quick update you'd send your mom during travel. But Caitlin never checks in for her flight. She never boards. She never makes it back to Arizona. Hours go by with no call, no confirmation that she's on the plane or has landed. Then, about 5 hours after that "I'm at the airport" text, Lisa gets a cluster of new messages from Caitlin's number. These are the ones that really rattle her. They say things like Caitlin is staying with a friend and needs some alone time, and that she won't be coming back to Arizona right away. This doesn't sound like Caitlin to her family. Not the content, not the sudden personality shift, and not the decision itself. She's literally about to start cosmetology school. This trip was planned around that date. Once detectives start pulling the phone records, the texts look even stranger. The "I'm at the airport" message and the later "I'm staying with a friend" texts don't line up with the phone's location. Instead of pinging near the airport or around Springfield, the phone is hitting towers along I-95 in Stafford County and in the Spotsylvania area, basically still down where James lives, not 50 to 80 miles north near DC. On top of that, police go through surveillance footage at the Springfield Town Center and at the metro station where she was supposed to have taken the train to the airport. They never find Caitlin on any of the cameras that day. There's also no evidence she was ever at Reagan National Airport at all. 2 days after she's reported missing, on December 7th, road crews working in Spotsylvania County find something in a drainage ditch off River Road, near the Fall Hill Avenue intersection just outside Fredericksburg. It's a blue suitcase, scuffed up, one wheel missing, like it's tumbled down the embankment. Inside is Caitlin's wallet with her Arizona ID, her cash, her debit and credit cards, her glasses, her phone charger, all the stuff you'd expect her to have if she was traveling. What's mostly missing are her clothes and her high school diploma, the exact document she'd flown to Virginia to pick up for school. The spot where the suitcase is found is a few miles from James Branton's home in Partlow, and nowhere near the route up to Springfield, the metro, or the airport. From there, the case basically splits into two tracks: what the evidence is saying and what James is saying. Officially, Caitlin is listed as missing from Springfield and classified as an endangered missing person. But both the FBI and the Spotsylvania County Sheriff's Office have said in pretty clear language that the last confirmed place she was seen alive was at James's home on Oak Crest Drive in Partlow. Investigators have also said they were able to prove he never actually dropped her off at the mall the way he claimed. There's also what happens once the investigation starts to focus on him. Early on, James talks to police, but that doesn't last. According to multiple reports summarized in places like the Charlie Project and local coverage, he eventually refuses to let them search his place. He declines a polygraph and he stops cooperating altogether. He has not been arrested or charged with anything related to Caitlin's disappearance, and law enforcement hasn't publicly named him as a suspect, but they've gone so far as to put a billboard about Caitlin's case on his commute route and to partner with the FBI to keep attention on it, which says a lot about where they think answers might lie. On the other side of this, you have Caitlin's life that just stops. There's no activity on her bank accounts, no social media, nothing that looks like a 19-year-old quietly starting over somewhere. Her fiance in Arizona has talked in interviews about how out of character this would be. They had just moved in together the year before, were planning their future, and Caitlin was excited for school. Her family has pushed coverage for years: Facebook pages, local searches, episodes of podcasts, anniversary articles, even some billboards. But the case is still officially unsolved. So when I look at this case as a whole, what I see is a really tight timeline with only a few verified points. We know Caitlin flies into Virginia to see her family and to pick up her diploma. We know Lisa drops her at James Branton's house the morning of December 5th. We know she never gets on her flight, that those texts from her phone don't match where the phone actually is, and that her suitcase, with basically everything she'd need to live her life, ends up tossed in a ditch back near home 2 days later. The last confirmed sighting of her is at James's house. Everything after that is either a story he told that doesn't match the evidence, or messages from a phone that, according to the records, never actually took her where she was supposed to go. Now, there is another thing I want to read from this. It is a first primary account. It's from Reddit, r/cold cases, and it's a Reddit post from someone who apparently knew of her, but I'll let it speak for itself. I'm gonna read it right now. So shout out to u/helpkate_. I feel so bad for this whole situation. People really care, but here, I'll read. And I hope that my video can bring a little bit more awareness to this case. I mean, at least just a little bit. If it helps at all, I will be extremely happy. Caitlin Akins disappeared 2015. Small town corruption. I want to bring attention to a missing person case that went cold way too fast. Caitlin Akins was 19 years old when she disappeared on December 5th, 2015, after visiting family in Spotsylvania, Virginia. She was supposed to fly back to Arizona for beauty school, but she never made it to the airport. Her former stepfather was the last person to see her. He claimed to have dropped her off at a commuter rail station, but her suitcase was later found dumped in a drainage ditch miles away. And despite being the last known person with her, he refused to take a lie detector test. Now, I knew Caitlin personally, and she confided in me back in high school that he had sexually assaulted her. If she was telling the truth, and I believe she was, that means she was left alone with a known abuser right before she vanished, and yet this case was barely investigated. I don't want to put personal details out there, but I grew up in this area, and I can tell you, Caroline County, Virginia, has a history of messed up things happening and getting swept under the rug. Rumor has it her former stepdad had connections in law enforcement. People around her suspected that police deliberately didn't press him as hard as they should have. And in a town this small, once the cops decide something is a dead end, it dies. But this case doesn't feel like a dead end. It feels like a cover-up, or at the very least, negligence. I'm posting this because I don't want her story to disappear completely. Maybe someone out there remembers something, maybe someone has new information, or maybe this just needs to be put in front of the right people again. Because Caitlin didn't vanish into thin air. Something happened to her, and the people who were supposed to find out never really tried. If anyone has resources or ideas for how to get renewed attention on this case, I'd appreciate it. She deserves better than being forgotten. That's the end of the Reddit post, and I agree. If anybody knows anything or can help, please do your part, please. A lot of murder cases drag on for hours, days, even weeks before anyone realizes something is wrong. Ashley Ouellette didn't. In her case, you're looking at roughly a 2-hour window where a 15-year-old girl goes from hanging out at a friend's house to being laid out dead in the middle of a dark road. And in all the years since 1999, nobody has been held responsible for that. Ashley Erin Ouellette was 15 years old, a sophomore at Thornton Academy in Saco, Maine. Friends and family describe her as one of those girls who always looked put together, loved to dance, loved attention, and was going through that typical messy teenage phase. Some drinking, boys, pushing boundaries, but nothing that made her sound like some out-of-control monster. Just a kid trying to grow up too fast. On Tuesday night, February 9th, 1999, Ashley asked her mom, Lise, if she could spend the night at a friend's house in Saco, often identified as her friend Aaliyah. Her parents said yes, partly because she'd been doing better recently and they were trying to trust her more. That night, around 10 p.m., Ashley called home from the house phone, told her mom goodnight, said, I love you, and everything sounded normal in the background, just girls talking, supposedly painting their nails and getting ready for bed. Her mom had no idea the parents at that house weren't actually home, and that kids had started hanging out and drinking. Somewhere after that phone call, Ashley left the first house. Multiple later reconstructions of the night, based on police interviews and reporting, say she got a ride to another place in Saco, the home of the Sanborn family, where teenage boys Daniel and Steven live, kids she knew from school. That house is the one that keeps coming up in every deep dive into this case. She makes it there sometime around or just before 12:30 a.m. and she's allowed to stay the night. Officially, the Maine State Police page just freezes the timeline at this point. Ashley is last seen alive at approximately 2 a.m. at a residence in Saco, where she'd been allowed to spend the night. By morning, she's no longer there. The next time anyone sees her, it's not at school, it's not at home, it's in the road. At 3:57 a.m. on February 10th, a mother and son are driving along Pine Point Road in Scarborough, Maine, near the marshland. Their headlights catch something in the lane ahead of them. At first, they think it's an object or maybe an animal, but as they get closer, the shape is wrong. They swerve to avoid it, turn the car around, and realize they're looking at a girl lying in the middle of the road, lined up almost perfectly with the center stripes. According to interviews they gave later, she was face down, arms straight by her sides, legs straight, toes pointed with a little blood around her mouth and her skin turning blue, but her body was still warm in the freezing February air. The son tried CPR while his mother called 911. It didn't matter. Ashley was already gone. At that point, no one at the scene even knows who she is. She has no ID, no purse, no jewelry that clearly identifies her. She isn't wearing a coat even though it's well below freezing. Police quickly treat it as suspicious. There are no obvious injuries you'd expect from a hit and run, and the way she's positioned in the road looks deliberate, like someone placed her there rather than the body coming to rest that way after being struck. Her body is taken for autopsy while detectives scramble just to put a name to her. They start with schools, checking who didn't show up for class, compare that against missing person calls, and when that doesn't immediately work, they give a description to local news at midday. It's that broadcast that finally gets them a lead. People call in saying that the girl they're describing sounds like 15-year-old Ashley from Saco. Her parents are contacted and brought in to identify her. That's how they find out their daughter never made it to school and never came home. That's so sad. The autopsy answers one major question. It opens up a bunch more. Ashley wasn't hit by a car. Her cause of death is ruled homicide by manual strangulation, hands on the neck. There's no massive blunt force trauma, no broken bones consistent with being run over. Investigators become convinced she died somewhere else and was then carried or driven out to Pine Point Road and left in the roadway on purpose. That's the part that sticks with, a lot of people and me. Not just that she was strangled, but that whoever killed her took the time to lay her body out, almost posed in the middle of a cold, dark road before disappearing. That's like serial killer shit. From there, the investigation snaps back to that house in Saco where she was last seen. State police search the home, talk to everyone inside, and start pulling together a detailed timeline of her last night. Who saw her, who drove her, when she arrived, when people claim they went to bed, who says she stayed on the basement couch, and who claims they assume she left during the night. Ashley's parents eventually file a wrongful death lawsuit against the owners of that house and their son, essentially arguing that whatever happened to Ashley happened in connection with that home. The defendants deny any responsibility, and after years of legal wrangling, a judge dismisses the suit in 2002. None of that ever results in criminal charges. In the meantime, detectives do what you'd expect in a high-profile teen murder case. They interview hundreds of people, friends, classmates, party kids, adults in that circle, and they seize and test physical evidence from the last known location. Over the years, different articles and podcasts have talked about search warrants, items collected, and possible links to other cases, like the disappearance of Angel Tony Torres a month later. But officially, Maine State Police keep it pretty tight. Publicly, they've said the case is still open and active, that they've identified persons of interest, and in later coverage, they've even acknowledged that they believe they know what happened, but don't yet have enough evidence to bring a case that would stick in court. Today, Ashley's murder is one of the cases highlighted by Maine's Unsolved Homicide Unit. Her family has kept her name out there for decades. I watched one interview from her uncle Dennis, standing near the marsh, talking about how sick it makes him to picture her being left in a thin shirt on that road in February. There's a reported $20,000 reward on the table for any information that finally leads to an arrest and conviction, and every few years around the anniversary, state police and local media push out another plea for tips. And yet, the basic outline is still the same as it was in 1999. A 15-year-old girl calls her mom from what's supposed to be a safe sleepover. A couple of hours later, she's last seen alive at a house in Saco. By 3:57 a.m., she's dead, posed in the center of Pine Point Road with no coat, no ID, and no one owning up to how she got there. That's the end of the video, guys. Thank you for watching so far. This one is pretty sad, this video, this podcast, but thank you for watching so far. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know what you want to see next in the comments, either on YouTube or on Spotify, whatever you're on, and have a great night, everyone. Sweet dreams.